Yeah, I'm here to share with you my 12-year journey studying a group of organizations that we used to call genius of people with great kung fu. These are organizations that were the most secure, the most compliant, but also the most operationally effective. And also, interestingly, they had the highest rate of project throughput and organizational change. So I'm going to share with you some of the biggest lessons I learned in that journey, and some of which made it into a book called the Devops Handbook, which I gave my one copy that I had in my bag to Dave here. And I wrote that when I was the CTO of Tripwire, where I was there for about 13 years. And I guess one of the big surprises to me in that journey was that people actually care about controls, right? The goal of when you have great operations organizations and great security organizations and great application development organizations, they don't actually throw each other underneath the bus. They actually have one thing in common that they care greatly about, which is controls. In other words, controls is what is in common for all of them to achieve their goals. So our goal when we wrote the Devops Handbook was really to try to capture and codify what made those organizations tick. How can we capture and codify their good to great transformation? And I think we did that pretty well in the Devops Handbook. But today I'm going to share with you maybe some of the platitudes of information security. In the ideal, information security is viewed as a business enabler, that we're helping the business win, that the business recognizes information security as, one on their side and something that they want on its side. But I think that the sad fact is that the more dismal reality is that information security is often viewed as a shrill, hysterical, bureaucratic people who love to slow things down, that suck the will to live out of everybody we touch. Right? How many people here have a friend who has been labeled any of those words? Right, so I have friends like that too. And so I'm going to share with you what I've learned over the last 2 years. And what I've had the privilege of doing since I left Tripwire was to surround myself with the best experts in application development, DevOps, operations, security, compliance, the lean manufacturing movement, the Toyota production system. I'm going to show you what I learned. And I think there's a movement coming called DevOps and a security twist to it called rugged DevOps, which I think is actually one of the last best chances for information security to become relevant. And worse, if we miss that boat, well then we're going to be lost at sea for another 20 years. So briefly, when I talk about high-performing IT organizations, there's actually something very interesting about them. Literally what we found when we started studying them in 1999 was that in a 10-minute conversation, you could actually tell that there was something different about these organizations. And one of the things that we noticed was that when you look at who was leading these organizations, whether it was information security or operations, they came from one of three backgrounds. They were either non-commissioned officers in the military, chemical engineers, or auditors. And not just CPA, green eye shade wearing bean counters, they were IT auditors. So can anyone speculate on what those three professions have in common? Non-commissioned officers in the military, where they give live ammunition to 18-year-olds. Chemical engineers, where they have long, elaborate recipes, right? And where endothermic can become exothermic. And then auditors. Anyone have a hypothesis? Controls. Controls, I like that, but more. What common values do they have? Discipline, I like that. Good, thank you, Susan.
Bad things happen to break the rules.
Oh, high outage cost, high consequence, yep.
They like the rules.
They like the rules, right? They favor rigor and discipline, right? I like the words rigor and discipline, right? What I learned in studying non-commissioned officers in the military, right, is that they have high outage costs. They give live ammunition to those 18-year-olds. I learned later in restaurant operations that they don't even give knives to 18-year-olds because the accident rate when you combine 18-year-olds, knives, and raw carrots, the accident rate is so high that it becomes untenable with the insurance companies. Chemical engineers, you missequence a couple steps, you lose fingers. And then, auditors, they just love controls. Incidentally, I'm going to share with you sort of the rugged DevOps movement, what I learned in the research, the two projects I'm working on. And then at the end of this talk, we have assembled for you, Adam and I, the service manager petting zoo. So I have three people who are not like you. They come from the service management space, and I thought it'd be interesting to sort of just have a little panel so that you feel comfortable with them. You can rehearse your best lines on them, without fear of consequence. All right, so we talk about high-performing IT organizations from a cultural perspective, a philosophical perspective. When you benchmark over 1,300 IT organizations, we actually found that there were very quantitatively measurable differences between high performers and non-high performers in a way that you could measure with a ruler, a stopwatch, or dollar signs. And so here's a way that here's what we found. And I guess the big surprise was that high performers outperform their medium and low performing peers by a factor of 4 to 5x. In other words, they're 4 to 5 times more productive than the non-high performers, as measured by. They had the fewest number of repeat audit findings. They had typically 1/4 of the number of repeat audit findings, and they were spending about 1/3 of the amount of efforts prepping and liaising with auditors. So they had the best posture of compliance. That also translated to security. They were 5 times more likely to detect breaches by an automated control. So Murphy does exist. High performers have security breaches too. The question is, did you detect it sort of internal to the organization, or did your neighbor or your business partner or your mom, or say, I just read about a security breach in the New York Times. Did you know about that, right? And consequently, they're 5 times less likely to have these security breaches result in some sort of loss event, right? So they found and fixed security breaches faster. But so we saw the compliance effectiveness, security effectiveness, but astoundingly. Right, there were also, you can see the effectiveness improvements, effectiveness differences in operations as well. They were implementing and authorizing 14 times as many changes with far better outcomes. They had 1/2 the change failure rate, and when things went wrong, because Murphy does exist, right, 1/4 of the first fix failure rate. So this is one of my favorite metrics. When something goes wrong, how good are you at fixing things the first time? Because they were so much better at that by a factor of 4, they had 1/10 the amount of time for several outages. In other words, when something goes wrong, right, typically the outages were fixed in 1/10 the time. And because they were doing such a great job in controlling unplanned work, they're getting more than 3 times the amount of planned work done. They're spending 1/3 of the amount of time on unplanned work, and unplanned work isn't free. Unplanned work comes at the expense of planned work. Right, so they're getting more projects done, 8 times as many, and it's because at the conclusion of those projects, right, you should feel viscerally at the end of every application development project, there's one more application to be managed in production. So consequently, there are 6 times as many applications, being managed in production. So before I go any further, does this resonate with you? Does this seem like a too cavalier an assertion? Can you give me a thumbs up? Gene, thumbs up, I buy this.
Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe? Yeah, by the way, and I see a lot of you writing stuff down. If you're interested in these slides, I'll give you my email address at the end, and you can just email me and just say slides, and I'll send them to you. So this was based on benchmarking from over 3 waves of studies spanning 1,300 IT organizations. So what we found when we... Any questions, comments?
Well,
yeah.
Quick.
Yeah.
So is this how you determined that an IT organization was high performing, or you determined they were high performing, and then this is what you found in
That's really interesting. Right. So the goal of the benchmarking study was to link controls and performance, and we used clustering to say, hey, what are the clusters of the archetypal links of controls and performance? And we found that you could actually predict this performance by a certain number of controls. In other words, controls could predict performance. Sort of, they correlated. But yeah, does that answer your question?
Well enough.
Okay. All right.
Another question?
Yeah.
What does the spread look like between a high
Oh, man. High performers have these incredibly tight variances. The bell curves look like this. With low performers, the bell curves look like this, right? I mean, like the variance was out of control for low performers. With high performers, I mean, it was this incredible tight clustering around each one of these metrics. So, sort of what you would expect, right? Without controls, things are random. Yeah.
Was that divided by industry, or were there any
It spanned all industries, right? And that was so important because we found a certain circular argument among non-high performers, like we don't have to be a high performer because we're not a bank. Yes, banks would say we don't need to be high performers because we're not a stock exchange. Stock exchanges would say we don't need to be a high performer because we're not a telco. Telcos would say we don't have to be a high performer because we're not a bank. So we kind of covered that, I thought.
Any groups of organizations that were better than, or were worse?
Yeah, I think the higher the consequence, right? We found like in financial services and telco, they typically had more high performers because there was a Darwinistic force at work, and I think we did find that the lowest performers typically were like service companies. I can't remember the others. Hotel companies, right? And that matches the PCI breach studies. Yeah.
Did you find that certain aspects within an organization, maybe the Windows Server group versus other groups?
No, there's no correlation between technology and performance, and which is interesting because it matches anecdotal evidence that says that hey, you can take the best service levels from the OS 390 group, but then when they retire and they get taken over by the Windows NT admins, right, you get service levels that look like a Windows NT 4 workstation, not a 390. So. I've never had this many questions.
is that data available even if it's anonymized?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just email me. Write research, and I'll send you the.
You got the answers for me.
Yeah.
Did your study span time?
No. No, it was just a snapshot in. I don't even know, longitudinal, whatever it is. I mean, it's just a snapshot. Yeah. Okay. Any other?
Yeah, you'll stop that real soon, won't you?
Right, now no more questions. So, one of the things that that caused us to write the Visible Ops book is that we found that not only did the leaders have certain values in common, there were certain cultural traits that we noticed, right? And there were 3 of them that really sort of popped out at us. One of them is what we call a culture of change management, meaning that whenever you go to the organization and say, what is the only acceptable number of unauthorized changes, what do you suppose the answer is? 0, exactly right. So, that kind of was interesting, right? And so we would challenge it, saying, hey, isn't change management bureaucratic? Doesn't it slow things down? Doesn't it suck the world to live out of everybody touches? And they would say, absolutely not, right? Mike Prospect from the New York Stock Exchange at the time, now they got acquired, he said, we do over 1,000 production changes per week with a success rate of over 99.5%. I was like, wow, that does seem like a very high rate of change, right? Significantly higher than what we found in non-high performers. So, they could show evidence, right, that they were using change management to avert risky outcomes, right, and achieve kind of the outcomes they want. The second thing that we found was a culture of causality. And I think the statistic that really kind of brought this to life for us was something that came from Microsoft, from the Microsoft Operational Framework Study. And they found that their best customers with the best service levels, the best customer satisfaction, were rebooting the servers 20 times less often than their average customers, and they were having 5 times fewer blue screens of death, right? So when we saw the statistic, we fell out of our chairs, my 2 other co-authors and I. Because it would match exactly what we found it was like the antithesis of what we found in our high performers. High performers know that 80% of the time when something goes wrong is due to a change, and 80% of the meantime prepared is trying to figure out what changed. So where do you suppose high performers look first? Change. Exactly right. They look at the authorized scheduled changes, they look at the detected changes, and then they will use that to drive their problem resolution outcomes, right? And instead of what do low performers do? They reboot things. Right? When something doesn't work, reboot the server. If it doesn't work, reboot the server next to it. If it doesn't work, reboot all the servers. If that doesn't work, blame the firewall guy, right? Because firewall guys are always causing outages. That has to cause. That has to be the cause. So this is what drives up meantime to repair, right? And this is what drives down first fix rates. And so the third thing that we found was that high performers had this ruthless desire to, let's call it a culture of planned work. They all wanted to find variance early and eradicate it in a planned way with less urgency. In other words, Jennifer Babe, she was the CISO at Bear Stearns for 11 years. She said, for us, it was like a low fuel light in a car. Right? When that low fuel light indicator went on, right, our goal was to fix things in a planned way in a week with less urgency, right, as opposed to critical service down, security breach, we have to drop everything. Anyone who can sort of carry a bucket and bucket full of gas, right? You're mobilized to sort of restore service to the fleet of trucks, right? So the way you measured that was what percentage of the time was spent on unplanned work, right? And so high performers were spending 5% or less of their time on unplanned work, where higher performers, that's high performers. Lower performers were spending 40, 60, 80% or more of their time on unplanned work. And incidentally, you're right, one of the biggest causes of rework in the organization, which is just another form of unplanned work, is security, right? Whenever we do that vulnerability scan, right, we say kick it back into development, right? That's unplanned work, right? Whether it's in the OS space or in the application space. How am I doing here so far? Resonate with you?
Yep.
Great. So this is what we captured and codified in the Devops handbook, and just to sort of frame one of our goals. The goal was really to describe in a prescriptive way, right? How did the high performers achieve their good to great transformation? Unlike COVID, whatever they call it, 7799, BS 20. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yep, that's right. Susan got right. Those are all descriptive frameworks like ITIL, COVID, the ISO series. Right, they're sort of like an extensive catalog of controls, catalog of processes. Right, they don't say what to do. Right, when you write the Great American Novel, right? You don't have to use every word. You just need to use the words that help you get to your goal, right? Our goal is to say, here's the 4 projects you need to do to implement and operationalize the right controls, right? That simultaneously increase operation, security, and application development outcomes. So let me just share with you before I go into the DevOps. What is DevOps? One of the really exciting things that came out of the benchmarking was it's one thing to know what high performance look like, right? It's actually just as important to know what controls correlate with performance. Our goal is to link controls with performance. And so what we found after the end of the 3rd study was that literally asking 3 questions could predict 60% of performance. In other words, all of the metrics I've talked about, you could literally ask 3 questions and predict with 60% accuracy all of those measures: compliance, security, operations, product feasibility. So here are the questions. To what extent does the organization define, monitor, and enforce some sort of standardized configuration strategy, right? Obviously from application, for applications, databases, OSs, networking, firewalls, all that, right? Virtualization, right? To what extent does the organization define what is a known good state, right? This trusted state that security is reviewed, that we have some mastery over, right? That's monitored. In other words, are we monitoring production configurations to true them up with the known good states? And to what extent are we enforcing it? Meaning, are we holding managers accountable that what's in production actually matches, these defined configurations? Secondly, to what extent does the organization define, monitor, and enforce some sort of process discipline, especially around the change in configuration areas? Right? In other words, they're defined, right, in a policy somewhere. They're monitored, right? So their production controls actually monitoring the release, control, and configuration processes, and then enforced, right? Just like we were talking about, the culture of change management. Is management holding managers accountable that people are following the process? And then third, interesting, is to what extent does the organization define, monitor, and enforce some sort of controlled access to production? Right, and so 3 years ago, right, I would always use the example of developers, right? You never want developers in production, right? Because give me a developer who doesn't put a backdoor into production, right? I'll show you one who can't fog a mirror, right? But now with Devops, right, everyone knows developers are supposed to be in production, so that's not productive. So let's talk about someone that we all hate, DBAs, right? To what extent do DBAs, have daily access to production, doing direct data edits, fixing up data because we have data quality issues because the application's so screwed up, right? I think whether you're talking about developers or DBAs or networking admins or firewall admins, what this really is indicating is to what extent do people have to have emergency access to production? The more that happens, is actually just is negatively correlated with performance. So these 3 things, you put them into a spreadsheet, you can actually predict almost all of the performance measures that we talked about. Before we go any further, any questions, comments? I reserve the right to cut it off after 10. Anyway, does this resonate with your own experience? Yeah? Do you care?
Lack of standardized configuration, lack of process discipline, I recognize all of these.
Okay. And by the way, does this resonate with you in a way that you actually care about? I mean, does this? How many people here would love to? How many people here have seen their best friends suffer from being in an organization that doesn't have these? Okay, that's good. All right, so let me tell you about maybe the darkest moment of my journey. So we wrote Visible Ops, right? We sold 200,000 copies. We did we did all this benchmarking. We created a nonprofit called the IT Process Institute that was that was sort of meant to sort of promote this. We raised over $1.5 million to actually do the benchmarking studies, and I actually found that. I guess in my ideal and kind of my vision of this, this would actually cause the business to care, right? And what I found was that it meant a lot to, by most definitions, it didn't really cause the business to care, right? And I think it's because it might have actually felt too much like a platitude, which I hate. Like one of the Visibops co-authors, George Spafford, I will always call him when he says a platitude, a banal, trite, or stale remark. Like, for example, buy low, sell high. Right? Technically true, right, at the 90,000 foot level, but actually quite useless, right? Because it doesn't say how. Right? Now let me give you some platitudes in the security domain. if we as information security practitioners can learn to speak in the language of the business, people will care because we'll help foster the right tone at the top. We'll build a genuine, trusted working relationship with our fellow stakeholders in development, operations, audits, and the business. And we can be savvy and take advantage of compelling events like the Sony security breach and Anonymous. Right, and we'll create real security programs so compliance will be free. So we take control of the compliance program from the auditors because security is everyone's responsibility, meaning no one's responsibility. Right? The auditors tell us what security is. We're going to do that because we're going to do plan, do, check, act, assess, its cousin, assess, plan, design, execute, monitor. And then, if we build the right control environment, the right security, compliance, and operations outcomes will come. Right? Here's the problem. I said this, to the people I've worked with for years, right? It's like, yeah, that's mine, right? So that sucks, right? If you can imagine how crappy it feels to sort of do all this work and say, you know what, I think all we did was generate a platitude. So it was actually a pretty dark moment in my journey, but not as dark as this. So I went to seek advice from my Yoda, right? His name is Ari Bailoff. And one of the proudest moments of my life was when Ari Bailoff wrote the foreword to the second edition of the Visible Ops book. Right? He was the CTO of VeriSign, so arguably they were one of the single points of failure for the entire internet because they own the DNS lookup service. Right? They had to grow capacity by a factor of 40,000 when Moore's law only gave 1/40th of that. Right? So it was a phenomenal engineering challenge, a phenomenal security program, it was a phenomenal operational program. Right? And it was just great to have him read the book. By the way, I've never actually seen Ari Bailoff smile. And when he does, I think he's just gritting his teeth, right? But really great guy. So I actually asked him, can you give me some advice, right? We did all this work, many of it, with his advice, to see if we could actually generate, something that would cause the business to care, right? And here's, I think what I might have said to him, and I don't think I actually showed him a PowerPoint slide, but it's possible, right? I think that my discontent came from operations and security was viewed as tactical. Security was too often marginalized. Information security and compliance programs were sucking all the air out of the room. The activation energy to actually do successful transformation programs seemed to be too high. Right? And the people who were actually sort of seeming to sort of get whatever they want with development. In other words, information security operations were always overshadowed by whatever the development people wanted. Right? They use up all the time in the schedule, leaving no time in the end for us, right? Even though all issues are amplified 10 times in production, right? And that's where all of the technical debt builds up over time. And we know that operations is a constraint for the entire organization. So why doesn't anyone care, right? So here's what Ari Bailoff told me, right? So it's like when you thought you hit bottom, right? It turns out bottom is a lot lower than you thought. He said, Gene, in 40 years, everybody will understand this. So in the meantime, right, you just need to do a better job of qualifying. Right? He said, don't make a moral issue out of it. So here I am. I thought he was going to, show me how to do better business cases, or he's going to, send me on a sales training journey, or he's going to have me walk in the woods and, sort of think deeply. But instead, that was the best he came up with. And I think I literally had tears sort of welling up in my eyes, right? Because I kind of interpreted that as him saying, Gene, I've ceased to care. Right? It was interesting then, but I have bigger fish to fry. And I actually left that dinner in Palo Alto like a wreck, for days. I mean, I was, it's the feeling, the emotions were like one of utter betrayal, right? It's like, wow, how could you do that to me, right? But it turns out that, it was actually one of the best pieces of advice I've ever gotten, right? Because he actually encouraged me to work with his group. He was then CTO of Yahoo, and he had me work with the search advertising group, which is a $5 billion a year business, doing all the display banner ad serving. And by working with them, I started to see something that I started to see everywhere else. So like in Sixth Sense, like the dead people are everywhere, right? I started to see something that was so much larger that in my mind, it sort of kind of created the basis of a real business case. So here's what I started to see. Operations will see that fragile applications are prone to failure. In other words, a lot of crap that developers put into production, right, that break all the time, right? And whenever something goes wrong, it takes a long time to figure out what bit got flipped, right? And what's something a moral issue out of it, right? The real thing that we have a grievance about is that the detective control was not a monitoring control in operations. It was a salesperson in Vietnam saying, hey, why are Spanish ads being served in our networks and upside down, right? And no one knows. So it took too much time to figure out what changed. It took too long to restore service. So the operations group is spending too much time firefighting and doing unplanned work. And compounded by the fact that these security jackasses are could giving us even more urgent security work, right? When I say jackasses, I say that with love and endearment, right? But because we're spending so much time on unplanned work, our planned work isn't completing. And we're finding that we do these expensive acquisitions of online properties, and frustrated customers are leaving, and our market share goes down, and suddenly the business starts missing their Wall Street commitments that they made to the public world and to the analysts, and now the business makes even larger commitments to Wall Street, right? Often dreamed up by art majors, saying, "Hey, we might have blown that deadline, but we're going to make it up by this even more audacious program," right? So suddenly development sees something. More urgent, date-driven projects put into the queue, right? So now we have even more fragile code put into production, which even, because we're taking so many shortcuts, are also less secure. By the way, is this resonating with anybody? Anybody have a friend see something like this? It gets even more insidious, right? Not only do we have more fragile code put into production, deployments start failing, right? Things that we deployed for things for years, right? So they start having issues, right? Things that used to take an hour to deploy take 3 hours, take a day, take 2 days, takes 3 days. So now you can't even do it in a weekend. Take a week to 2 weeks to 4 weeks to a month. In some cases, months to deploy, right? Because you have 1,300 steps, right? And so the deployments become so heavyweight and awful, right? That the business says, you know what? We can't afford to do this many releases. We're going to lengthen the deployment interval, right, to amortize the cost of deployments, which means there's even more moving pieces during each deployment, which means it's harder to diagnose, which means that we're now spending our best people, right, and ops, dev, information security, right, urgently working deployment issues, which means that they can't fix underlying issues. And so now you have ever-growing backlog of crap that needs to be fixed that will never be gotten to, and an ever-increasing amount of tension between ops and development. And incidentally, where is security in this? This is like a tribal war between ops and development. Security is like a shadow. I mean, security is not even in the zone, right? I mean, luckily we're not between it, but they're too busy fighting each other. So what I found was that this happened in the largest internet companies, and it seems to happen in almost every organization where IT is being relied upon for operations or project delivery. Just a little status check. How many people here have seen this before? This terrible downward spiral. Yeah. So isn't that interesting? So I guess the big aha for me was that the business missing Wall Street commitments, that is not a VP of operations. That is not an IT operations problem, right? That is a business problem. And I guess in my mind that was a very cathartic aha moment, right? Because I felt like, you know what? Our job as practitioners, whether it's security, operations, or development, is just to merely point out this, right? Is by the time the business decisions that we're making is resulting in the business missing commitments they're making to the outside world, to customers or analysts or whatever. At that point, if we've done that, then I think we've done our job, right? And more than that, I think the Deming quote is, "Survival isn't mandatory," right? At a certain point, this is as far as we can take it. If the business isn't smart enough to take the right corrective actions, then it's not really our problem. I mean, it is our problem, but it's not our problem. It's the domains of control, influence, and concern. So, for me, that was sort of the big aha moment. And it seems to be one that every IT organization faces because every organization is simultaneously pressured to respond quickly to urgent business needs, which means make more changes, as well as provide stable, secure, predictable IT services, which means make no changes at all, right? And so the problem is that is a core chronic conflict that every organization will face. So, but we know that high performers have somehow figured out how to break, that cycle, right? And I think that's what the benchmarking, really, informed us is that that it is possible to break that, be simultaneously more nimble, more operationally available, more secure, more compliant. But then there was this amazing movement called Devops. that I think kind of blew all of our findings out of the water. In other words, it didn't invalidate it, but it showed just how good organizations can get. So it started off as a presentation that John Allspaw gave at the Velocity Conference in 2009. He went on record saying, we are doing 10 deploys per day, right? Because Dev and Ops are working together, at Flickr, which is where he was the VP of Operations at. And this sort of blew everyone away because, people were more, the cadence that people expect is, hey, we do one major deploy a quarter, right? Not 10 deploys a day. The president in his slide said, he's saying, developers and operations just don't get along, right? Spock is, development, he's a little bit weird, he's just a little boss, he thinks a lot. Whereas Scotty, he just loves turning knobs, right? He's easily excited, yells a lot in emergencies. And so they're very temperamentally very different. But, the way he achieved his breakthroughs is creating a DevOps team where ops could think like developers, and developers could think like operations, right? And by the way, in this scenario, right, where is security? Security is like the red shirt on their away party, right? It's like the expendable guy, right? Properly embedded, properly done, security becomes embedded into each one of their jobs. In fact, Scotty and Spock would freak out if security wasn't present in the room. All right, and so John Allspaw wanted to say, you need this loving, mutually respectful relationship between Dev and Ops. But, it's interesting, as the DevOps community has evolved, right, they're saying, hey, it's not just about DevOps, right? Theo Schlossnagel, another luminary in the DevOps space, he's saying, DevOps is incomplete and is interpreted wrong, and it's too isolated. I love this quote. It's like .star ops, right? It's not just Dev, right? It's, Dev, security, DBAs, network, right? So it's like this. But I'm not sure it's all that much more. I love it. I wish I had. There's a T-shirt that you can buy like that, and I'm waiting for mine. So there's a group of practitioners, including a working collaborator of mine, Josh Corman and James Wickett, who leads the OWASP forum in Austin, Texas, who gave this really great talk about rugged DevOps. Right? It's like, all right, let's take this movement called DevOps and figure out how do we integrate information security in, so that information security is baked into every part of the SDLC, the deployment and packaging process, and the operations process. And I love what they've done. I think they are really starting to nail down what is information security's role in this new world order to get breakthrough results. So Josh Corman, sort of coined this rugged computing thing, where he was talking about it's like 4 pillars. You have to be defensible, you have to have operational discipline, like visible ops, you have to have situational awareness, whether you're talking about operations, security, or developers, and you have to have effective countermeasures. And they actually started giving these things a name. And I think the trick here that is so neat is they took security and just sort of cloaked it in all the other sort of quality words, right? In other words, the ruggedities are availability, survivability, defensibility, security, longevity, portability, durability, compliability, right? It's just just another sort of adjective that can fit into any CIO's PowerPoint slides and sort of fit in, right? And so there's examples where people, just by using a slide like this, go from 0% budget to 3% budget, right? Just by words, and it's quite the trick. And I think the other thing that's so interesting is that the DevOps movements need us. There's a famous case just this summer where Dropbox admits that for a weekend all of the authentication controls are turned off, right? Oops, right? And you can imagine, right, how this might have happened, right? A developer sort of turns off the authentication flag, right? Puts in a code fix and then forgets to turn it back on before doing code commit and deploy, right? I mean, that is really, somewhere. I think that's a huge information security failure, right? If there's an information security person, they sort of fell asleep at the wheel, right? They sort of didn't do a good job of baking into the daily operational process of development and deployment. So, this is why DevOps needs information security. Talking to Adam, and one of the things I sort of wanted to actually make very explicit is, here's why I think DevOps is important. One is, imagine you're doing a startup, right? And you are competing with people that are doing 10 deploys a day, and you're doing 1 deploy a quarter, right? I mean, how competitive do you think we'd be doing 1 deploy a quarter, right? And by the way, that's not even impressive anymore. Amazon, they went on record saying they are doing 1 deploy in the Amazon enterprise, supporting the Amazon properties, not the cloud customers, For the Amazon property, they're doing one deploy every 9 seconds, right? I mean, that is nimbleness, right? That is a competitive advantage, and the business cares about that. Secondly, it's not just startups. It's happening in the enterprise and public sectors too, right? The cloud, the entire cloud thing, I used to poo-poo saying it was shady, it was just outsourcing to other guys. But when you talk about like an organization like Netflix, where they routinely spin up thousands of, Amazon instances, and, when they don't need them, tear them down, right? And they're now shutting down all their data centers, and the last Oracle instance will go away probably this year, right? That's what's a sign of things to come. And I think working in a DevOps environment will be a necessary skill set for information security 5 years from now. So take it for what it's worth. These are only my conjectures, but I think it's a real movement, and it signifies something that the business will do out of a survival instinct. In other words, it helps deploy features faster, gets operational results, and they need to be more secure. So let's help it as opposed to obstruct it, or worse yet, be bypassed by it unknowingly. And so here's why, here's the data point for me that sort of showed me kind of the power of this. So I was working with the CTO of AOL, his name is Eric Passmore, and when we sort of worked through, when I showed him the slide with his operations peer and their CTO at the time, he said, wow, you're putting your fingers on my biggest problems. Right, we have turbulent install, we have operational stability issues, we have security issues, where security is causing a lot of urgent rework. And he said, you know what? I see that operations is a bottleneck. We can complete the code, but it takes too long for operations to get the code into production. Environments are never available when we need them. In other words, we're ready to deploy, but operations needs 2 weeks to get the environments ready. And by the way, security needs another 2 weeks after that, right, to turn around the security reviews. And then when we do the security reviews, we have to roll it all the way back, and it breaks everything in production and in development. At least it causes chaos and disruption. Turbulent installs have become a norm. And here's an interesting one, right? Because we're developing the code in isolation of the environment, they actually got themselves in a situation where he was describing a code release that was waiting on an environment, and they needed to upgrade from the Linux 2.4 kernel to the 2.6 kernel to get multi-threading support. And it took operations 2 quarters to get it done. And his reaction was like, oh my gosh, that was like an equivalent of a 2-quarter work stoppage for us, right? We couldn't deploy code for 2 quarters because of the ops people, right? And he's thinking through what sort of promotions we have to do to our customers. How many promises did we miss because of an operations issue, right? And so he said, you know what? That's not an operations issue. That is as much my problem as my operations peers. And so I want to help this. I need to help. So that's the beginning of a loving relationship. So here's what these breakthroughs look like. The goal is to increase flow of features from dev to production. Increasing the throughput, decreasing work in process. We're trying to create a trusted system that can move planned work, from dev into production. And how does this differ from visible ops? It's interesting. In visible ops, we talked so much about unplanned work. We sort of defined it. We described what it felt like, but we sort of missed everything else, right? We never actually talked about planned work. And so, I think what this body of work really represents, and what DevOps really represents, is, the inverse of visible ops, right? It's like, how do you actually manage, control, and make planned work flow? So let me tell you about 2 projects I'm working on. That my goal is really to sort of help the DevOps movement and help the business realize that we're talking about a problem that they need to care about, right? This is not us pushing a string. Get them to sort of help drive this change and pull information security in. By the way, is this interesting? Thumbs up? So the first one book is what we're calling the DevOps Cookbook. So the goal here is to sort of write the visible ops for DevOps, right? So we call it the cookbook. And so the people that the team to work on this is a guy named Patrick Dubois, right? He's the kind of founder of the DevOps movement. He's like one of those genuine, earnest, integrous guys I've ever met. A guy named John Willis, who was the VP Services for Ops Code. Again, a guy named Mike Orzen, which is like Mr. Bell's smarter brother. The latest Shingo Prize winner, and then myself. And the goal is really to say, how do you start and finish these DevOps transformations? And show what is, it's not just DevOps, right? It's about information security, DBAs, networking. How do they fit in, right? And just let me just share with you briefly kind of what the DevOps piece feels like. So typically these DevOps organizations start around like a cloud initiative, or it's typically small. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe for me initially. It's typically 10 people or less. But one person says, hey, I need to own the dev resources and the operations resources, and they usually pull in the security guy as an architect, right, to help manage the requirements and to make sure that we see the entire end-to-end flow from storyboards in Agile to the sprints, to deployment, to production, to the feedback loop all the way around. I think the biggest aha moment for me was like, wow, one of the first things that you do is you have dev and ops work together in the first sprints. How many people here work with Agile shops? Right. So for Agile, for people who aren't conversant with Agile, they work in these sprints, which is the basic unit of development, typically between 1 week and a month. And the goal is at the end of every sprint, right, you have a piece of shippable code, right? So a very noble purpose. But by the way, a deliverable product increment. The problem is that typically they only work on the code, right? So by the time you end up in the last sprint, you've used up all the time, and only then you realize, holy crap, we don't have an environment to deploy into, right? There's no time to actually do the architecture work. So the major kind of change is dev and ops are held responsible for developing not only the code to deploy, but the environment it deploys into, right? And then, where do you use that environment? In dev, right? And in the later sprints, you work on the downstream environments, keyway, staging, production. And these amazing kind of stories of like how this becomes an incredible sales tool, right? Because you can now ship a production environment, right, on the sales, on salespeople's laptops, right? All of that is just inherently synced. And then you're integrating information security, keyway into the daily sprint activities, right? So, and we're never left behind. Another big piece is, you take your most senior ops and, in here, let's insert security, into the dev structure, right? So they have a very special responsibility, right? Whereas the developers typically focus on user functional requirements, ops and security focus on the non-functional requirements, right? Use cases and stories for ops. What I love about Agile, right? I know that it's not the panacea. Not all Agile shops are actually very agile. But what is wonderful is if you can get those ops use cases in a story, that is actually the beginning of the standardization work. You can actually define here is what ops work is, so the developers can finally understand that. And the same applies to security, right? They have a special vote. They have a vote just like any other team member. But their special responsibility is to bring in ops and security requirements, right, into the source, right. So in other words, we're helping train them. Hey, here's how the configuration settings should be located. Here's what the default security settings should be, right. Here's what the logging requirements are. And ops and dev, they can also pull the anon cord, right. When they see something wrong happening, they can pull the cord just like in a Toyota production line, right, and stop the entire flow, right. And we don't restart until we figure out how to prevent it from happening again. And that's the expectation, right? So it's not people screaming at the poor security person saying, hey, we have a problem. That's kind of our job. And then kind of advanced concept is, hey, when you have a sprints going every 2 weeks, what happens if you can actually do a deployment in 10 minutes, right? This is kind of an exciting possibility that you can decouple production releases from the sprint boundaries, right? In other words, you don't have to wait till the end of the sprint to deploy. You can actually do minor code fixes, enhancements. You get a bunch of frowny faces in the service desk or in the user forums. Let's go ahead and fix it. We don't have to wait till the end. And that's kind of introducing this notion of migration from a sprint to a Kanban, whatever. Anyway. So it's like all great things can happen, like once you can get deployment times down. And so we talked about putting ops into dev. Now let's talk about putting dev into ops. There's this amazing case study that was done by Mob Browser. It was this really kind of cool startup where what they did was basically use Amazon Web Services to spin up tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of instances to basically do load testing from the outside world. And they made a decision because they noticed that waking up developers at 3 a.m. is a great feedback loop. We found that defects got fixed really quickly, right? So I'll be honest, I had a sort of moral issue with developers in production, right? Screwing around, doing what developers do, and we all know what developers do, right? You can't trust them. And by the way, my background is development. So, but I think I'm over that now, right? I mean, I think there is a very special cerebral exercise that information security must drive, which is what are the separation of duties, right? Requirements that are relied upon. When can you let developers, be level 3 support? When can they get access to production? How do you sort of manage that risk? No one's going to care except for information security. Okay, so our goal is to really sort of outline in prescriptive form, how to do that. So, just before I conclude and we go to the panel, let me tell you about one other project that I'm just really excited about. Because this other book I'm working on called "When IT Fails: Novel," and I think the goal here is really to help kind of create a vehicle so that the business people, application developers, operations all say, gosh, you know what? We all see this problem, information security. It's not just you, it's us, right? Like any dysfunctional marriage, right? We are as much to blame as you, and we're willing to step up and solve our piece of the problem. It's being written by the same team that wrote the original Devops book, and what we're modeling it on is a book that probably had the biggest influence on my career ever, right? And it's this book called The Goal. How many people here read The Goal? Awesome. So for those of you who haven't read it, I recommend reading it. It is like a phenomenal book. Here's what it's about. It was written in the 1980s about a guy. It's a novel about a guy named Alex. He's a plant manager, and he has to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they're going to shut the plant down. Right? And so for 170 days, and I've never managed a plant, but I'm like, oh my gosh, it was horrible reading it because I'm like, I think I've seen this before. Right? I've seen it in a different context. And you really live the world through someone who's earnestly trying to figure out how to solve the problem and is trying to piece together what is wrong about his assumption that's causing almost inevitably, right, for certain bad outcomes to happen. This is now integrated in a lot of MBA programs, around the world, and it sold something like 3 million copies. 3 million copies since it was published in 1984. So here's kind of what we're writing is a book that's really sort of meant to do the same thing but for IT. So instead of one character, there are two characters. One is character Steve Master, the CEO of a $4 billion a year company, right, retailer, manufacturer. And the other character is Bill Palmer, the VP of IT operations, and they're a $4 billion a year revenue company. And Steve, the CEO, will often be heard saying, "We're not Google, we're not Microsoft. IT just isn't a core competency. If I can't delegate it away, maybe it's time we outsource it, right? Someone should take our mess for less, right? So kind of the opening chapter is, Steve walks into a board meeting, and basically he's Circuit City competing against Best Buy, right? The board is holding him accountable for late projects, third year of a SOX 404 repeat audit finding, outages, security issues. Right, and so they said, hey, you know what? We're going to take your chairmanship away. And maybe your days as the CEO are over. Maybe we need someone younger. Someone who understands technology to sort of lead this company to where it needs to go. So this doesn't make him happy, right? So he basically fires the CIO, who takes the VP of IT operations with him, and enters, the hero, Bill Palmer, the AS400 director of operations, who's purposely tried to avoid VPdom, right? Because he knows that the life expectancy is very, very low, right? He says, no, I don't want the job, but then finds that, oh my God, he couldn't resist the sales job that Steve did to him. And then on the first day, he gets handed a payroll outage, right? All the salary employees got paid, none of the hourlies, and he can't figure out what went wrong. But it turns out that it was the sales guy, it was the security people, right, who pushed the tokenization change to avoid the auditors. Yeah.
Oh, I could see the wire that was the problem.
Oh yeah, right. The auditors aren't abused. Second day is he walks into an audit finding where there are like 952 IT general control deficiencies. Bill's like, oh, jeez, what have I done? I knew I shouldn't have taken this job. Right, the business is dismayed. And the third day, right, he walks into a project management meeting where he gets thrown underneath the bus by the VP of application development and the VP of marketing, the evil Sarah, right, who says, we are deploying Project Phoenix, of which our survival depends on in 11 days. And the operations people are going, what? That was supposed to be until next year, right? They're saying, no, you don't want to do this. Terrible things will happen, but they don't listen to them. And so, this is the outcome. Right, and so the goal is, just to share with you my motivation, the CIO of Columbia Sportswear said, Gene, when you finish that book, not only will everyone on my team need to read it, dev, ops, security, auditors even, right? But my boss will need to read it, and my boss's boss will need to read it, right? The CFO and the CEO. Right? It's like, I think this will help frame the dysfunctional marriage between business and IT to at least have the other side understand each other and maybe gain a little bit of empathy. So that's a little bit about the book, and I'll just take 5 minutes to share with you my favorite character in the book. Who's not he's a secondary character, but he's one of the most complicated characters who actually makes the biggest transformation. So his name is John Pesci. He's been a CISO for 9 years. He's 39 years old. He's been a very aggressive career climber, ex-Big Four auditor. And he was, he's not very happy these days, right? He's haunted by thoughts that he's going to be, turned into the fall guy. He's going to be blamed for all the bad outcomes of business. He went into security because he wanted to catch bad guys, right? He was driven by a sense of duty, which you have to do, right? And so, as he thinks about the humiliation he feels on a weekly basis as he begs the project managers to tell him where the dev people are meeting, right? Because he just wants to sit in. And they're like, no, they're off-site. No, we can't tell you that, right? So he realized that this is his self-image, ideally, but this is how he feels, right? And so his kids say, Daddy, you're just not the person I remember you to be. His wife says, you're not the person I fell in love with, right? Whenever we drive, you get this look on your face, your jaw clenches, right? I hate the person you've become, right? And so John's not very happy. So there's basically 3 things that John sort of discovers, right? That he holds very dearly, and it turns out to be wrong, right? So assumption number 1 is John wins based on how much work he can put into the IT system. In other words, how much money can I steal from the developers and the operations people, right? How many vulnerabilities can I jam into the queue, right, and badger them to fix, right? How can I twist the arms of line managers wherever they live, QA, development, operations, to sort of do my work for me, right? Because I'm driven by a sense of duty and moral good, right? And what he finds is, kind of one of his aha moments is like, oh my gosh, by jamming these controls into production, by fixing these things without going all the way to the source, he's actually just adding excess control complexity, right? And so he realizes his unique gift, right, has become the forebrain of the organization, and only he realizes what security controls are actually important, right, and which ones are the most important to fix, that fix things systemically. And he does this and he can actually shrink the scope of audits, whether it's SOX 404 or PCI. He's the only person who's actually capable of doing this work, and he gets appreciated for it. Secondly, his second assumption that turns out to be wrong is that Infosec wins when they can meddle with all sorts of daily work. Just like this guy with the clipboard hovering over people as they type, right? It turns out, he learns this wrong. And he realized that he has to shift his focus from the work center level. And by the way, I think the OWASP community in general, right, is in such a better position than the operations security people, right? Because we focus on the flow of work into production. That's where we should be focusing our efforts. He has a special gift, right, that can facilitate the relationship, facilitate the dialogue between ops and dev and say, hey, there's a better way. We can actually do a rugged DevOps transformation where we can simultaneously get fast flow features in production, which are simultaneously more scalable, available, survivable, sustainable, securable, etc. And the last assumption is there's a finite zero-sum game for information security. In other words, cycles for information security come at the expense of the other people in the group. And what John discovers is, hey, by decreasing cycle time, by increasing flow, right, the entire pie grows. Operations, actually, their constraint increases capacity by a factor of 4x. The development release rate goes from quarterly to 3 times daily, right? And there's something magical that happens in the product management process where they say, you know what, we have to dedicate 10% of all our cycles for non-functional requirements, which include security, right? So now the security backlog is finally being worked, and then consequently the security mean time to find and fix goes from quarters to days to hours, right? So we build a real sustainable control environment that achieves compliance and security objectives. So, the goal is really to replicate, the results that we saw in the benchmarking studies, right? Simultaneously get a control environment that passes audits, we find and fix security breaches faster, we're more operationally effective, and we're doing more planned work, right? And orders of magnitude that we never thought possible before. And so what does this mean for John? Hey, here's John realizing, oh my gosh, I'm loved, right? And here's the entire organization applauding me, saying, hey, oh, thank you, John. You made the auditors go away, and you helped us discover this rugged DevOps thing. And here's a picture of John being invited to the office party, right? You know, for the first time ever. They're saying, hey, we're having a party on the loading docks. Come join us, right? And it's like, oh, really? And they're like, no, we want you. We love you, right? And you know, John gets to have a loving relationship again. So if you're interested,
Some new woman.
right.
Yeah, you're young.
Different. Yes. If you're interested in any of the benchmarking, just email me. I'll send you the slides. If you're interested in benchmarking studies, I'll send you the executive white papers. Here's a list of some of the resources I've used, and one of my favorite books is Inspired in terms of kind of product management. Is this book called Inspired? He was a product manager of the eBay service, and he was the person who had to sort of fix. For those of you who recall eBay in 1999, when they couldn't even stay up, what did it feel like for him to sort of like, end up in jail, losing his wife and kids, right, and saying, oh my gosh, we didn't pay down technical debt fast enough. Now he says 10% of all dev cycles must go to non-functional functions, which includes operations and security. If you want to learn more about DevOps, we'll have our book done, but in the meantime, the seminal work on this is called Continuous Delivery, which really was a stepping stone that enabled all of DevOps. If you're interested in the books that I talked about that we're working on, when Active Fails, or the DevOps book, just mail me. You can just write a list. If you send me slides or research, I'll send you that too. So with that really concludes the preparer part of this presentation. And now, Adam, if you're up for this. I thought it would be interesting, but I'll leave it up to you, although their feelings are very fragile. I actually wanted to introduce you to two people that have a long history in service management who have to deal with people like you and me. Right? And I thought I actually wanted to ask them two questions and then open up for however you want to spend the time. So Susan Ryan, could you come up here? She used to be the head of service management for Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Minnesota. Charlie Betts was the enterprise architect and also helped manage the ITSM program at Wells Fargo. And then Jan Vermont, well, she's not exactly an auditor, but she has a lot of friends that are auditors. He was actually widely cited in the lost book. Whatever you want. Okay, that's your...
Sit.
I thought it would be interesting to...
Just can't.
Just want to stand?
Sorry.
Or maybe just stand up.
Question number one, and
Guess I'm
I guess
outvoted.
this goes to, what advice would you give to an information security person who wants to help with application security, DevOps, service management? What advice would you give to them who maybe have never dealt with someone like you?
You'd like me to start? I'll
Sure.
start. Sure. All right.
Just like in the rehearsal calls, Susan.
Okay, so let me just back up a second. I worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield for 10 years, 5 years in the service desk, and then 5 years doing IT service management and building out our IT service management infrastructure, all the processes that we used, the tool that we implemented on. Pretty much every ITIL initiative has a defining moment. Something that goes really badly, and the senior management says, I don't care what it takes, fix it. And a lot of times the answer to that is ITIL. We'll fix it with ITIL. We'll fix it with repeatable process, and we'll make it better. Well, our defining moment came in the terms of an audit finding that was material, or near material. It was an O for 15. 0 out of 15 emergency changes recorded in the change management system. And the senior management said, I don't care what it takes, fix this, because this is going to go to our customers if we can't get this fixed. So that was my invitation to implement ITIL. So I owe my ITIL experience to our IT risk management department. So I say, yay, thank you. Thank you. Oh, nice. I can see you guys now. My advice to information security, I guess, is to partner with IT service management. they were the reason that I got to start, and then I depended on them. I relied upon them throughout every process that we worked on, especially processes that were controls-based, change management, configuration management, things that required us to be keeping track of things in a very careful manner. And I met with them and said, tell me what I need to do to make sure I can pass the audit, sure, but really make sure that I'm not going to hurt my customers. What do I need to have in place to make sure that we're doing this correctly? Because you can help me. And so we would brainstorm and bounce ideas off of each other, and our process then developed with the controls in place that made it possible for us to do a good job and pass audits. When they came to audit, we said, here you go, no problem. Because we had everything in place in order to make sure that we could do that. So I would say work together with IT service management, and
Because they need the help.
they definitely we needed the help from them for sure.
Hey.
Go ahead. Same question?
Yeah.
Well, Wells Fargo, the environment was a little bit different, just being so massively scaled. A little bit of context. The Wells Fargo annual IT budget is now at about $6 billion a year. About $2 billion of that is spent provisioning and supporting infrastructure alone. Security is obviously a tremendous concern. But yet, one of the opportunities that I saw, again, was still the partnership.